Greetings, this is Christina Cantrill from the National Writing Project, and I'm with the Katies, Katie Kline and Katie McKay. We're here at National Writing Project Resource Development Retreat. So we're all developing resources that will soon be shared at the current educator.innovator.org. And Katie are working to share some of the work they've done as part of their LRNG Innovators grants. So let me just turn it over to them so they can introduce themselves and also tell us just a little bit about their projects.
I'm Katie McKay, and I co-direct the Heart of Texas Writing Project at the University of Texas at Austin. And our LRNG grant was this past year, 2017-2018 school year. And our challenge was to connect students' out-of-school interests with their in-school work. And I worked together with a team of 6 elementary school teachers from Bastrop, Texas, which is about 45 minutes east of Austin as a rural district in east central Texas. And our teachers designed, implemented, and documented units of study that culminated in publication outside of the school. So each of the 6 teachers did one unit that ended in local publication in community spaces like libraries or parks or museums. And the second semester they published digitally. And those digital publications made their way to either local websites or national websites for sharing.
Great.
And I'm Katie Kline. I direct the Greater Kansas City Writing Project in Kansas City, and our LRNG project was the Kansas City Storytellers, which brings together high school students to share stories with each other, the goal of which is to break down the divisive barriers in our community, like race. Mm-hmm. And we received our grant in 2016, so we're actually entering our 3rd year of this program, and our initial grant through LRNG was really about connecting the community to the work that we're doing.
Great. You guys are you must be writing about it because you can speak really well about what you're doing.
We are writing about it.
Yes, great. I just wanted to give a little background to LRNG Innovators for those folks who don't really know this work. So for the past several years, the National Writing Project, with support from John Legend's Show Me campaign, as well as the MacArthur Foundation and also a nonprofit called Collective Shift, have been supporting, there were 3 rounds of LRNG Innovator challenges. And all of these challenges emerged from colleagues of ours, both folks who worked inside of schools and outside of schools, who were thinking about how to design for connected learning in their own context and for youth to really tie their interests to opportunities to make and create and connect to larger networks, whether academic or community or career. And they were thinking about this work and named some of the major challenges in this work, right? So the 3 rounds of grants, each was organized around 3 of the primary challenges that emerged. So, Katie, yours was that challenge of connecting inside of school and outside of school. Yours was more related to really tapping and designing around youth interests. Of course, all of these overlap and are interconnected, and all these pieces are, inherently connected. So what's really exciting is that we now have over 30 design examples of ways that different ways that this work can look like in very, very different contexts. And just from the get-go, you're working with some of the youngest learners, kindergarten to 3rd grade, I think?
To 3rd grade, yeah.
And you're working primarily with high school students, right? So even that across ages and different contexts. So it's been really exciting for me to have the opportunity to look across these grants and really see some of the sort of core themes that are emerging across them. What are we learning about this work? And then, so I wanted to invite, I know that you, at this retreat, we had opportunities to do interpretive circles. And so yesterday you guys had an opportunity to do an interpretive circle together. And that there was an interesting conversation that I feel like could be really valuable to kind of talk through a bit. So I wasn't there, but my understanding is that it's really was around youth going public with their work. And as writing project educators, I think many of us bring a real commitment to creating authentic audiences and meaningful opportunities for youth to share their work out in the world. And I also have been hearing, as you guys talk across your work, other purposes that going public with work and for youth having this opportunity, other purposes that emerge and that this serves. So maybe we could talk about those too, because I feel like they're sort of not often represented in the conversations around this.
Yeah, you want me to go first?
Sure.
So I think for me, what's sort of crystallized in our interpretive circle, and then actually in another space earlier this morning was, we are bringing students and their personal stories on stage and bringing a community, inviting our community in to hear those stories and be a part of the work of building community. But we really recognized our responsibility of, we're putting students on stage, and we have not spent a lot of time on craft. And we imagined that our audience who was coming to a storytelling exhibition might be expecting well-crafted stories. But we were driven through this project, we were driven by our purpose, all of us, the students themselves, of writing and sharing stories with each other to build community. That was the purpose. And so we didn't clean up and polish a lot. The raw story is actually what made us lean in closer and get to know each other. And we wanted that same experience with an audience. So, but we also felt really responsible for helping an audience hear those stories with that same purpose in mind. And so we did a lot of work as a leadership team, and we worked with our students to figure out what are the things we need to do to prepare an audience to hear these stories the way they should be heard. And that is without judgment and without looking for something polished, and instead figuring out how the story enters me and changes our community together.
Those must have been powerful conversations, I imagine.
Really powerful conversations. Yeah, it kind of gives me chills as I think through some of that work we did.
Yeah, cool.
There's a lot of similarities between our projects where, obviously, like we said, we were giving authentic audience for our students, which I think a lot of us as a National Writing Project community have talked for a long time about the motivating reasons for that, and the deep research-based pedagogy and how that's related to creating and growing strong writers. And we in our project, we also ended up finding these additional goals, in the context of Title I schools, where a lot of scripted curriculum has become the mainstay. We found that through sharing student work, ours was not completely raw. We had spent weeks doing the best that we could, but we really wanted the students to have ownership of that work, so it wasn't always completely polished by the time it made it to the audience. But we did that intentionally because we felt that this other purpose that kept arising was educating the audience about what good writing instruction looks like. And that is student-owned and student-centered and based on their interests and their knowledge and their growth. And so if our hands were on it and we did so much heavy editing, or if we were teaching, like Lucy Coffin says, if we started teaching the writing instead of the writer, that then it was our work and our voice that was out there in the community. So we had to do some things also really intentionally to educate our audience about why we made those choices. So like maybe having a sign next to kindergartners' ABC books displayed at the library that quoted the research behind the importance of invented spelling for cognitive development in young writers. Or with another kindergarten group, a lot of their writing was in the form of drawings, and so the kindergarten teacher said, well, the audience isn't going to know the story that I knew, that I got to hear them say. So we recorded students' voices and had a QR code so that while you looked at the drawing, you could also hear the student's voice, and then the intention of their story, even though the child wasn't there with them, the audience could have that intention. So in the end, our purpose was really a lot of like what you said your purposes was, well, I mean, your purpose was building community, but what you had to do in order to build community first is you had to educate your audience about how to receive those stories. And I think we had to do that too. I wrote down what you said was helping the audience hear those stories. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some, which I was talking to Judy Buchanan yesterday, and we were talking about the need to re-educate even our colleagues and our administrators, parents, community organizations about what project-based writing looks like, because it's been marginalized in a lot of our schools.
Right. Yeah, I can hear Judy talking about, with the youngest learners, how drawing and inventive spelling is such an important part, and yet often is not seen, mm-hmm. and how we have to start to re-see that. So, how valuable this is for all of us.
It takes a trained eye to look with an appreciative lens at writing, because mm-hmm. so many of us have learned to write through this idea of looking only at the grammar and the spelling and the conventions. And so those quote-unquote mistakes might stand out to us and distract us from the original intention of the writer. And so we have to train our eyes as teachers and also help our audience train their eyes in that way to see the original intention of the author.
I think it's one of the conversations we had earlier this morning is the social justice aspect of this work. If teachers are the gatekeepers before students go public, and most teachers represent a particular class and race that their students do not, then the gatekeepers are really not allowing the English learners to be heard, or the students who are recent immigrants, or so I think there's a real social justice aspect to the work of making sure we still allow students to go public without being polished and representing sort of an audience's expectation, if that audience is relying on misconceptions of what writing should look like.
So I think that's so important, and I'm wondering, both of you are in leadership positions at your site, running a site, where do you start? Like how has this become part of your practice at your site, or has it, or like are you sort of, what does it make you think about in terms of working together as writing project teachers?
For me, it's foreground a lot of my work, and when I'm presenting at a multilingual conference, or if I'm presenting at a primary conference, that's our main theme of the day. I still sometimes do the whole day through that lens of foregrounding audience and purpose, and trying to work with teachers to first think about that. Let's first just figure out like what are some potential dates and events and places where this work might go, so that can then we can just tag everything else or attach everything else to that as we head toward it. It's not necessarily completely known, but just like imagining that this work that we're helping kids to create is going to go somewhere else other than in my file or for my grade book. And so I think that even when we go out into schools, it's become more of our conversation, and as we train teachers and we do consulting in schools. And then, of course, when teachers come to us at UT, I think it's become a big part. It's always been a part of the conversation, but there's something about starting with that part. As I've looked at a lot of books about writing workshop, there's often a final chapter about your publication party and your audience. And to me, it seems that maybe that chapter needs to come first.
That's really interesting, yeah.
That's a tough question for us. That's interesting to hear you say that, because it's very true. Like, it was when we brought a group of teachers together, we had this idea of creating a story slam, and here's how we thought it was going to go. So we had the story slam idea, and we had written goal, and the goal of building community. But when you put those two things together, it was clear they didn't work. The story slam requires storytellers who are competing against each other, who have polished pieces. So we eventually had to abandon that notion of a story slam in order to honor our purpose. And then that really changed then, well, what's it going to look like when we put them on stage? In some ways, it was a hard-won battle with teachers in the room, because the teachers among us were really committed to this idea of, I know how to help these students become better storytellers.
Yeah.
That's what they knew how to do, and that's what they wanted to do. So there were some people on the leadership team who were saying, it's okay, we can let this go. We can prepare the audience so that this awful thing doesn't happen that some of the teachers were imagining would happen. So I don't know how we do it. I just know that it's messy.
Yeah.
Well, and that I was thinking about what we're both saying then really is that we need to make more public the process, the messy part.
Right.
To the idea of publication in our minds is something that has been vetted and polished and edited and is in this certain shape that looks conventional and in some ways looks homogeneous, right? Like in some ways it's like so much like other things you've seen before that you have to look deep to find how it's different. But if we're making more public the process, then we're also making more public the individual original piece of the author.
That's true. And do you think that this is easier for students these days who are used to? I mean, for many of us, like putting things out there online or digitally feels like publication, whereas for our students, it doesn't have that connotation of publication. So I wonder if some of it is a generational gap as well.
I think so. I think that some of our students might be more ready for some of this type of sharing of in-process work because of growing up in a quick share type of environment.
Yeah, I noticed I feel like I remember when blogging became a real thing. I remember learning so much about watching bloggers, and I was like, oh right, this is not, it's like in-process work. It's a lot of in-process thought. And it's meant to support dialogue among people, like bloggers would dialogue with other bloggers through their blog. And it wasn't these sort of like finished pieces that then, anyway, I feel like we are in an environment where these like the styles and intentions and purpose, the context for writing has shifted and can shift in different ways. And I mean, it's probably always true that the context and purpose is, but now dynamically, even more dynamically sometimes and at greater distance, we can do this stuff too. So that's pretty interesting. Well, in the last interview that I did with the previous, I talked with Ellen Shelton and then Sandra and Angela from Albemarle County about their work, and we were talking about the role that, I mean, you guys have talked about this, but that role of sort of stepping back from like what you've been trained to do as a teacher and really sort of thinking like, okay, wait, how do I provide supportive and useful scaffold and frame, yet not control this thing, and that how that really is an exercise in and of itself. I don't want to give away your resource that you're making, but you were talking about how you're like sort of unschooling things a little bit, right? That sort of dialogue. Can you talk about that just a little bit, or?
Yeah, I guess again, being driven by this purpose of building community is not unforeign to teachers. We're used to building community in the classroom, but usually it's in service of something else. So we build community so that I can engage my students and then help them learn about volcanoes, or we build community so that when we share writing, people feel more comfortable. But to have community building as the end game is not something we're used to doing as teachers, and so often in our planning, we would create something on the agenda that felt very much like school, and someone would be like, "Whoa, this can't be like school. We need to take that out." And I don't think as teachers we have a lot of opportunities
Yeah.
to design something that's not for school. And in this kind of a project, it's really important that it not be like school, because in school, certain people are marginalized, certain students are marginalized, and if we're going to create an equal playing field where we build community together, then we can't be marginalizing students.
Yeah,
And that's what happens in the school process.
Yeah. We were talking in the last conversation too about how it was so important to do this work as peers, that both our colleagues, and both of you worked with teams of colleagues on this work, and then how the youth also supporting each other as peers in the process, that felt like a really important piece of it. From the student perspective, were you seeing also then, like, was this new to them? Did they feel like this was hard, or, or
Well,
different?
one thing, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but one thing I'll always remember was walking into a bilingual kindergarten classroom toward the end of the year, and they were finishing up their Libros Informativos, and I was there to help start videotaping and documenting those. And when I saw the books, even after all the work I'd done with these teachers and all the faith I had in them, for a moment, I questioned that, like, how heavy-handed the teacher had been, because the books were so amazing, and I thought, like, this is kindergartner's work.
Right.
Like, I kind of questioned her. I said, well, did you have them come over one at a time or whatever? And then she kind of looked at me like, no, and then I went and sat at the table while they got settled and everything and got started with their workshop, and I started watching, and of course I know this can happen. This is what we tell teachers can happen all the time, but just still how amazed I was again at how independent. Both of the adults could have left the room, and workshop would have continued to run exactly as it should. And teachers and kids were not in their seats. They were in other places in the room. They were working in groups. They were talking to each other. They were helping each other. Everyone was what we would say, on task. They were all working on their piece. They were all very motivated. And the amount of talk in the room was, it was so fascinating to see how much talk and writing could coexist and not be, it wasn't like never was one distracting from the other.
That's really, just in case any of the storytellers from this year are watching this video, I want to add this, and because you reminded me of how wonderful the stories were on stage. So when I talked earlier, I acted like, they were super raw, we hadn't crafted them. Yeah. That is true. And they were amazing. And people in the audience cried, and we all had chills, and the magic happened. With teachers stepping back and not being the experts, and being able to shed their teacher skin, which was really hard for all of us. Yeah. But we did it. And the stories were raw, and we did need to prepare an audience, and we were blown away by how wonderful they were. Yeah. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to end, actually. So thank you so much for your great work, and thanks all the kids for their great work. Yeah. And check out the current.educatorinnovator.org to see the resources they're putting together, and super excited to have this chance to work with you guys.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thanks.